Hello, Marcia Cavanaugh is on assignment today. On paper, being a state legislator is a part-time job. This year, it has been full-time plus as another special session approaches a deadline. We'll look tonight at the ways that the legislative process has changed. We'll also hear the latest on energy strategy for getting friendly voices at a council meeting, and we'll follow up on a series about the children of Central City. A study this week revealed just how many restaurants there are in New Orleans and why summer is difficult for many of them. All of this is on the table for tonight's Informed Sources. Jonathan Bullington, reporter for NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. Stephanie Grace, columnist, the New Orleans Advocate. Ian McNulty, food writer for the New Orleans Advocate. And Michael Isaacstein, reporter for The Lens. And Stephanie, let's go to you. The news has been bubbling all day long about what's going on at the legislature. And somebody's got to do some pretty finite math at some point, dividing all these percentages of a penny for the sales tax. But where do we stand now?
Well, the news is that something happened, strangely enough. We're used to nothing happening, and in the House specifically. So the fight has been basically what to do about the fiscal cliff, which is approaching now in a week. I mean, we've been talking about it for 2 years. Here it is. That's when about $1 billion in temporary sales taxes drop off the books. It was a subject of the first two special sessions this year, one before the regular, one after. The legislature couldn't agree, mostly because the House couldn't agree. The House is kind of governed by a group of very conservative Republicans, for the most part, who are really at odds with Governor Edwards. Not so in the Senate, and there's been a big group of Republicans. You know, there's one group that will vote for no taxes, but there's another group that really has been trying to work with the governor and come up with a compromise. And there's been a lot of compromising, but the problem is you need 2/3 of the votes in the House to get anything out, and all bills of this sort must start in the House, so the Senate is sitting there waiting. So today, Friday, they finally did something. They passed a bill out of the House, sales taxes. If you'll remember, the last special session broke down over the people aligned with the governor wanted to renew half of the penny that is expiring. So the sales tax rate would be 4.5%. The kind of Republican version of that was to renew a third, so it would be 4.33%. The difference, if you're a consumer, would have been 17 cents per $100 spent. So really nothing. So this is really about something else. This is about maybe ideology, maybe bragging rights, maybe who gets a political win, who gets a political loss. In this special session, the Republican side had kind of moved to 0.4%, so a little bit closer. And the problem is they needed some Democratic votes to get to that 70, and a lot of the Democrats, particularly the Black Caucus, basically said, we're not going below half a cent. We're not going below 0.5 because that would mean cutting services that are really badly needed. So what happened today, finally, is that they passed a bill, sent it on to the Senate that is halfway in between the 0.4 and 0.5. So basically, the sales tax rate, if this goes through, would be 4.45%. So basically, one side came down 5 cents per $100, another side came up 5 cents per $100. Everybody gets to say they got something, and hopefully they'll go home. And part of the deal is that TOPS will be fully funded. That was in question. And again, this is assuming it all goes through the Senate, and it probably will, I think. We should have food stamps. We should have some of the things that were really threatened. It would involve some cuts, but not extreme cuts.
Yesterday, there was a lot of discussion when the Supreme Court reversed an earlier ruling and said that you can charge sales tax on the Internet for products bought within your state. So what are they saying over there? How does that affect the debate?
Well, it's interesting. That news came down the day that the House was supposed to vote on a number of options, and it really kind of blew everything up because all of a sudden there were people thinking, wait a minute, are we going to get, kind of manna from the Supreme Court? Are they going to save us from ourselves here? And it pretty quickly became apparent that's not the case, that, the money would not start flowing next week. We don't know how much money it would be. All the mechanisms to put this in place are not there. It's not even clear whether Louisiana can do it because the Supreme Court laid out some very specific, kind of criteria for how this tax should be collected, and Louisiana really doesn't have that set up. We could be sued, all kinds of things. So but because it happened when it did, at a very delicate moment in the negotiations, there were some people who maybe would have voted for the tax who kind of said, wait a minute, we don't know enough. we don't want to vote for taxes that turns out we might not need. So,
we-
yesterday things were looking
We
pretty
might
bleak.
get revenue from it one day, but no time soon.
Correct, and we don't know how much. I mean, there's an estimate. Some people are guessing 800 million a year, which is very high. There's a federal estimate of 300 million, and that's state and federal, because this also applies to the localities that. Which is one reason it's so complicated, because we don't have a central mechanism for collecting this tax in the
Looking
state.
at all this, you did a column this week about how politics is changing.
Yeah.
How is it changing?
Well, the fact that we got to this is really a sign that it's changing, because it was a very ideological fight, a very partisan fight. And that's just not something we've had traditionally in the Louisiana legislature. Kind of for everything that's wrong with the legislature, and there's a lot that's wrong with it, one of the good things is that it has not been divided along party lines the way Congress is, so you don't get into these, stalemates that you see all the time in Washington. And it was interesting, last week, Steve Scalise and Cedric Richmond, high-ranking Republican, high-ranking Democrat in Congress, who are very close friends, they did an interview on Face the Nation about their friendship and about the fact that they are able to work with each other, even though they're kind of very different ideologically. And they talked about this, and it's true. That really came out of the fact that they were in the Louisiana legislature together, and they kind of came up through the system where you can, as they say, disagree without being disagreeable. And they even started arguing about health care and taxes on the show, and it was tough, but it was friendly, and it wasn't personal, and they're still friends. So, it's kind of ironic that that's being held up as a model nationally, but it's kind of disappearing locally a little bit, and people are trying to hold on to it.
Well, Michael, you've been looking in political life where there are some people who've been disagreeable and have been paid to be disagreeable. And that was particularly at the hearings for Entergy. You've been doing this for the Lens, and if people don't know that the Lens is a non-profit journalistic research group that just does a lot of information, provides the other media if they want to, and does your own reporting. So you all do some really good work. But you've been following up the so-called astroturfing.
That's right.
At the Entergy hearing, when it's apparent, it's obvious that Entergy had paid some people, and you've learned some more information.
Right, yeah. So just to recap, what we know and what's been confirmed over and over again is that Entergy paid a subcontractor, the Hawthorne Group, basically to corral specific numbers of supporters and speakers to go to 2 city council meetings that had to do with a proposed gas plant. That was eventually approved by City Council in March. City Council opened up an investigation into the matter, and part of that forced Entergy to hand over roughly 6,000 pages of documents, which included emails, phone logs, contracts between the Hawthorne Group, Entergy, and a third contractor, Crowds on Demand, which did a lot of the recruiting and the payment itself.
So think about that name again, Crowds on Demand.
Right.
That tells you something right there.
Right, and if you go to their website, it's clear they're not hiding what they're doing. The CEO has spoken in interviews that they do pay people to go to meetings, to city council meetings, to speak there. So yeah, it's not too hard to figure out what they're doing. But what these new documents do is they try and answer one of the big questions that remains, which is, what did Entergy know? Did they know people were being paid? So their line so far is that they contracted Hawthorne to get specific numbers of people there, but they didn't know those people were being paid. The new documents cast a doubt on that explanation. We now know that the plan was approved by the upper echelons of Entergy's leadership. Charles Rice signed off on it and had specific input as to how it would go. They helped design the plan down to the specific numbers of people that would go, what time they would get there. They even helped design the T-shirts that they would wear. And they also show, interestingly enough, that Entergy was made aware of these allegations 3 different times, as early as October. And the point person at Entergy who was receiving these allegations, she would forward them to the Hawthorne Group, but she would never actually ask if they were true. At most, at one point, she asked for talking points in case they were asked about the allegations, to which Hawthorne provided a list of kind of these answers that skirted around the central question. And again, one of those allegations early as October, so they knew about the allegations, but they ended up signing a new contract with them for the February meeting after that. It also shows that they were worried about the appearance of legitimacy the whole time. There was a discussion towards the beginning where the point person at Entergy asked, what will these supporters say if they're asked who they're affiliated with? And one solution that was brought up is that they ended up getting more of these orange T-shirts, the ones that the supporters were wearing, to hand out to their real supporters from the AFL-CIO, and they purposefully sat them close together so that they would kind of blend, and it would be hard to tell who was who. So there definitely was an open question on Entergy's side of would this look legitimate, but whether purposely or through negligence, they never asked the question, who are these recruiters and what's incentivizing them not only to go to 2-hour city council meetings, but arrive as much as 2.5 hours early to those meetings.
I mean, one way to read some of these emails is like she was trying very hard not to ask the question that would get the answer she didn't want to hear.
Right.
And you can certainly see that.
Right. There seemed to be an explicit effort to not know what the recruiting tactics were. Certainly on the Hawthorne side, it's hard to believe that they didn't know what was going on. Right. Hawthorne has also denied that they knew Crowds on Demand, again, the company called Crowds on Demand, was paying people. So, and even Crowds on Demand CEO has come out and said he disapproves of some of the tactics of his recruiters. So if you follow this logic, the entire gambit falls on the shoulders of the 2 local recruiters, and no one else knew what was going on. So it casts a doubt on some of the official explanations.
Well, this is an important topic. I'm glad you're looking at it, because who knows in the past at council meetings and hearings, the people that have shown up. Well, Jonathan, you and Richard Webster were part of a long-term project where you got some grant money to study the Central City. You all rented a place and you stayed, worked out there like for 4 months in the Central City neighborhood. You befriended a football team in the area, a kids football team. And what are some of the experiences? What did you learn?
I mean, a lot. You're absolutely right. The University of Southern California Annenberg Center of Health Journalism awarded us a fellowship. We used some of that to rent office space in Apex Youth Center on Toledano. And we set out with this idea that we wanted to explore how children who grow up in that neighborhood are affected by the violence that surrounds them in the community or in the home. And, if you've ever been a crime reporter in this city and you've gone to a crime scene, you've seen kids on the other side of that yellow police tape, and you just know that this is having an impact in ways that maybe we don't always know or that we don't want to acknowledge. And that was really what we set out to explore here. I mean, what we found was that kids are facing incredible amounts of trauma in their homes and in their communities, and it has the potential to be very devastating for them in the way that their brain develops, in the way that the systems in their body function. So this is not just, this can't be solved by, toughen up, or if they had discipline, or if their parents did a better job, which are a lot of the things that we keep hearing from people. It's deeper than that, and so that's sort of some of the many things that we found out of this, and particularly that notion that until we really address what's causing this, we're never really going to progress anywhere. Thinking about kids as just being bad kids, or kids who need to be suspended from school, or they need to spend some time in like youth prison or adult prison is kind of not the way to go here.
Did you find anything at all that was encouraging, any sign of progress? Or?
Yeah, definitely. Little things like the coach and his wife of this football team, they grew up in Central City, and as we said in the story, they have incredibly rough upbringings, and yet with little or no resources, they've managed to cobble together this football team. And I understand, I talked to them recently, this coming season they're going to have a second team, so there'll be 2 teams there. The idea is that if they can have more football teams and just more activities in that park, more parents, more adults, maybe that park is a little safer than it has been from time to time. That's encouraging to us. It's encouraging people like Nicole Boykins at Crocker and some of these schools in New Orleans that are really at the forefront of recognizing trauma and trying to change the culture of their school to address it properly. That's very encouraging to us. It's encouraging the response we've gotten from people. There's been a lot of people in public and private sector who have reached out to us and said that this is an issue that they feel very strongly about, and they're glad that we've kind of kept the conversation moving in that direction. So there's been a lot to be hopeful for. And I think the thing that's most positive about this is that, we say how bad it can be, but it doesn't have to be that way. And these things are very fixable. The scars and the damage that trauma can do to a child can be fixed. There's plenty of evidence-based therapies out there that work. We just have to do them. We have to recognize it's a problem and then have the will to address it the right way. And if we do that, kids can overcome what they're facing and have
And the first step
future.
is improving education, and some indications are people seem to think that the education is improving. Of course, it's a long-term.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
long-term. It's going to be years before you see the
Exactly.
impact
Yeah,
of that.
it's a long game. These things take time, and that was the thing people told us: is be patient. It's not an overnight fix. This takes time to really gain hold, and changing the culture of a school is not an overnight thing.
Okay.
So,
Well, it's a great effort, a very important series. So.
thank you.
Well, Ian, you and I think Jeff Adelson spent some time looking at the restaurant industry in New Orleans, or
Well, Errol, people in New Orleans, it seems like sometimes all we talk about are restaurants,
Sure.
right? And two of the main themes that I've been hearing about for years on the beat is A, there's so many restaurants opening, there's so many new restaurants opening, and then seasonally, gosh, summertime is really hard. That's when you see some of your favorite places close, but newer places, long-running places. If a restaurant's going to close, gosh, it might be in the summertime, right? So we decided to take a look at what restaurants are really up against in the summertime here. It's the slow season, of course. That's been the constant since people were eating in New Orleans. But one of the factors that's been changing is that number of restaurants. So we wanted to find out how many restaurants there actually were in New Orleans. And this turns out to be, it's been an elusive number through the years, because there is no one place you can just say, send me the number of restaurants, and they send you a big data dump. No, it's always up to some level of subjective interpretation of what you're counting when you're counting these things. Tom Fitzmaurice, longtime food writer and radio host, has kept this number that a lot of people in the industry have used through the years, and that's his number, and that's one that's based on the decisions he makes about what he considers a restaurant and the geographic circle that he draws around the area. And so that's been a benchmark that's been very consistent to his method. But we wanted to look at...
and his number was roughly.
When I talked to him last week, he says there's 2,014 restaurants in the multi-parish area. He doesn't count chains. He doesn't count a lot of stuff, right?
Okay.
We wanted to look just at New Orleans, which is the area that I think is the focus for the most discussion of what this restaurant boom is all about, and the one that's most in sync with the tourism economy of the whole city, right? A lot of people coming to town are coming for New Orleans restaurants, not necessarily for restaurants in Outer Marrero or in Hammond, right? So we got state data on food service permits, which you need to open any kind of restaurant, but not just restaurants. In that list is everything from nursing homes to hospitals to American Legion halls to, strangely, a few car washes. I mean, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of these entries, and we wanted them over time so we could track what had happened with this number. So really, this involved my colleague Jeff Adelson, preparing the numbers for us in a way that we could analyze, and then going through and making a decision about each place. Is this a restaurant? What kind of restaurant? Is it full service, fast food, counter service? Is it a bar that has a restaurant? And it can get kind of tricky, right? Think about just looking at a database if you're contracted to do this somewhere else. Dat's Grocery on Magazine Street, which is a po' boy shop, and La Petite Grocery, also on Magazine Street, which is a very high-end
white
James Beard.
tablecloth
Yes,
thing there.
they sound the same on paper, right? So you have to kind of know which is which, and you make a lot of calls to figure it out. So we came up with a number for New Orleans. In New Orleans, we found 1,216 restaurants. That's everything from Commander's Palace to the Wendy's down the street.
So you counted the chains also.
We're counting the chains, yeah. We're not counting grocery stores, gas stations with food. Our thinking is that people, if you're in a restaurant business, another Rouse's that opens up, yes, it may serve some meals, but you're not sweating that as competition. Whereas, somebody may pull into the cheap, fast casual burrito shop instead of going to a po' boy shop, right? And so they are in competition. Now, the interesting thing about that number is that it's grown quite a bit. Pre-Katrina, by using the same criteria, we had 984 restaurants. So that's a gain of 24%, and that's not just all these restaurants
Even
opening.
though we
That's
have a smaller population, we've
population.
had a dramatic
a
increase.
significantly smaller population, and you talk to restaurateurs, they'll tell you, yeah, look at that population. New Orleans has 390,000 people in it. This last count. Those are not all prospective restaurant customers, especially on the higher end. Believe me, you get a lot of people in there. They're not in your dining crowd. And so that makes the tourism number even more important, because New Orleans' population of tourists has been growing. It's like this whole other second city that rolls through every once in a while, right? And in particular, the area that we saw the most growth in was full-service restaurants. 33% more full-service restaurants now than there were before Katrina. So for every 2 restaurants there were before Katrina, you can count 3 now. And that's a lot. That's a lot of the pie to go around. And that's what restaurateurs say. They say they feel it. And in the summertime, which brings it all together to our season here, that's what lays it all bare. You can do really, really well from late fall through carnival season and the festival season. But then all bets are off after Memorial Day, and that's when if there's a weakness in your restaurant, if there's too many restaurants in your area, the slowness of the summer exposes all of that. And the restaurateurs we talk to, they say it's no joke. People who have been in business for decades say every summer is a struggle for them. They've learned to do certain things to make it through. But it doesn't get any easier, and it's not getting any easier as more restaurants join the
So now that we're in the first full week of summer, support your local restaurant, I guess.
Well, that's one thing I learned from reading the story is I think something we understand intuitively, though. If you're a regular at a place, if you really love it and value it, if you haven't been there in a while, they'll probably be really happy to see you in the summertime. Yeah.
Well, Stephanie, a couple of appointments came down, federal appointments this week.
Right. After a very long wait, we may be on the road to having a new U.S. attorney finally in New Orleans. If you'll remember, Donald Trump fired U.S. attorneys all across the country, including Ken Polite, who was the Democratic appointee under Obama, in March of 2017. So it's now, the end of June 2018. And the president has nominated a guy named Peter Strasser, long been rumored to be coming. He's someone with a really interesting resume. Very, very long time federal prosecutor. He actually, I have to say, he prosecuted the first corruption case I ever covered, which was back in the mid-90s. He worked for the U.S. Attorney's Office. Then he worked for the Justice Department all around the world as a legal attaché. Came back, was a partner at Chaff McCall, and is now the nominee to basically, head the office that's been kind of a storied office with Ken Polite and Jim Letton and Eddie Jordan, who's back in the news, all kinds of big people. The other one is for a federal judgeship at the district level. He has not been nominated yet. We are expecting him to be nominated. Greg Guidry, who is a justice at the Louisiana Supreme Court. And that's for the seat that's being vacated by, or has been vacated by, Kurt Engelhardt, who was promoted up to the appeals court. And that, again, he has not been nominated yet. He'll have to go through the Judiciary Committee and the full Senate. Probably should be okay. He's a very pro-business. He's kind of known on the Supreme Court as a very pro-business justice. He kind of helped tilt the court in that direction. He replaced Pascal Calagero, who was, of course, the legendary Chief Justice, who was Moon Lander's law partner back in the day, a Democrat. Guidry's obviously a Republican. And so, that still has to happen formally and also work its way through the process. The other 2 vacancies on that court there are nominees that have gone through the Judiciary Committee but not been approved by the full Senate. One of them, of course, is Wendy Vitter, who's gotten a lot of attention. The other is a lawyer named Barry Ash.
Okay. We want to acknowledge the death this week of Felicia Kahn, who was a longtime civic activist. She died yesterday at the age of 91. Like 70 of her years were spent in politics. She loved politics. She loved the social causes. She loved the women's causes and causes of minorities. Very active in the Democratic Party. Went to something like 10 Democratic National Conventions, including the last one where she was the second oldest delegate there. That's her with LaToya Cantrell, and Cantrell is quoted saying, "What an inspiration Felicia Kahn was to her." And so, Stephanie, a lot of people, a lot of attention is given to the prominence of women in politics, but long before women were being elected, they were very, very active behind the scenes.
So active, and nobody more than Felicia Kahn, who was head of the League of Women Voters back in the day, and then she kind of left because she wanted to be involved in more partisan politics because she's very much a Democrat, and she helped found or kind of bring back a group called the Independent Women's Organization, which has become a real powerhouse in New Orleans politics. A lot of women involved. You know, they have forums, hundreds of people show up. So many people cited her as a mentor. I mean, not just LaToya Cantrell, but Helena Moreno, Jay Banks, again, not just on women's issues, but on all kinds of social issues. She kind of got her start working more on the civil rights end, you know, because when she got out of college at Newcomb, she went to work at City Hall and really saw some of the disparities between, you know, the white workers and the African American workers, and that was kind of one of the things that got her involved. And, you know, even I've seen her pretty recently. I mean, she was always grabbing my arm and wanted to talk about the latest election and the latest cause. I mean, she just had so much, tiny little person who just had so much kind of energy and power, and to see the outpouring after she passed away was really, it was nice to see because she deserves it.
All the people that know her, first of all, very proud to have known her, and she was certainly made a lot of contributions to local politics. All right, let's talk about the future. Jonathan, what you would be looking for?
This Sunday, a colleague of mine wrote a really interesting story that I hope everyone checks out. It looks at whether the expansion of the Huey P. Long Bridge has lived up to all that was promised on both sides of the river. So check that out, please.
Okay, Stephan?
Well, assuming we actually get a tax deal and we avert the fiscal cliff, I'm really interested to see, you know, what we talk about next, because we've been talking about this for over 2 years. So.
Ian?
Well, hope springs eternal, and so do appetites. I'm sure you're going to get hungry again. We talked about summertime, how slow it is for restaurants. Never slower than the French Quarter. I think all locals should spend a day or two checking out what's new around the French Quarter. It's the center of our city. There's a lot to offer there. There's some really great new restaurants and bars that have emerged lately. Long Ways, one I'd recommend. Manolito is a tiny little place with great cocktails I recommend. And check out what's happening along North Rampart Street. That's long been a very slow to come back area, but with a new streetcar coming through there, there's new restaurants and bars, things are looking up.
Okay.
So yesterday, City Council appointed an independent investigator for the Entergy investigation. So there are two major names on it. One is Matt Coman, who was the lead prosecutor on the Ray Nagin case, as well as former District Judge Calvin Johnson. And they'll have subpoena power, as well as they'll be able to interview witnesses under oath. So it'll be interesting to see what they dig up.
Ian, just quickly on the restaurant thing, one thing I've noticed is that maybe one reason for the growth of restaurants is that restaurants is one business that ethnics can get in at a pretty much high playing field and work themselves up. And it's a business that if you're an ethnic, it's an advantage at this point.
Absolutely. There's a low barrier for entry. If you do something interesting, you have something in your family heritage and your national heritage that people are interested in. You know, you don't need a degree. You don't need, you know, it's not cheap to get into the restaurant business, but you don't need millions of dollars of capital. You don't have to invest in machinery and new technologies. It's sweat equity. That's right. And it's and this is a great town to do it in. I mean, if you do good food here, people will take notice. They will come. Now, success is not guaranteed, but you will get people's attention with food in New Orleans.
Okay, well, thanks to all of you. It was very delightful. We learned a lot. Thanks for all of you watching. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.